So I'm looking at the lawsuit right now, the Yuzu lawsuit. This is the Nerd Nets podcast, by the way, everybody. And I'm looking at the Yuzu lawsuit, and here's what it says. Users who have a lawful copy of an unmodified Nintendo Switch console, any unauthorized Nintendo video game ROM, a game file by itself, not secured on a console or cartridge, is an unlawful copy. Either a user unlawfully dumped it from a physical cartridge or digital eShop game on a hacked Nintendo Switch, or the user obtained a pirated copy from the online pirate ROM library. So they are saying that if you rip your own games because you're breaking their encryption, that is illegal. You don't have the right to back up your own stuff. Russ, what do you think about that, man?
I think that is not a new concept from Nintendo. I've heard that quite a few times. We heard it during the Virtual Console days and stuff like that as well. Basically, as soon as people realized that they could back up their stuff, especially when law was setting precedences to say, okay, like the Napster thing, you can back up your own MP3s from a CD player. They had these kind of precedences already there, where it's like if you own a CD and then you rip it using iTunes into an MP3 and then put it on your iPod, that is all totally kosher. And then Nintendo, once people started putting that association with video games, they're the people that were really kind of staunchly no, you can't do that. You only own the license to play the game on our console in our terms, basically, or on our terms. It's weird, and I think this is one of the points where they'll probably not do well in terms of pushing this legally. But it's the other points that I think are way more salient in their defense or in their prosecution, in that they the whole idea of just bypassing the technology in the first place is what's wrong.
Right.
And so Rich has some good points about that, actually. And so I kind of want to kick it over to him, because he always is so succinct in all our text conversations about this exact problem. So
I don't know if I can carry that over to voice, right? But yeah, it seems like, so that what we discussed in the Discord, right, was how they were phrasing everything as unlawful, and that it's intentional, right? They are trying to set up that, like you said, even just circumventing having prod keys at all is unlawful. And if you have prod keys, that means that no matter what you do with it, it is therefore unlawful. So that's how they're sort of setting this up in terms of the even the precedences, like you said, that they have, Nintendo of America v. Gary Browser, all of that just relates to just hacking your Switch, right? So a lot of people are going to say, you can play this, you could have played Tears of the Kingdom on a hack Switch. Nintendo acknowledges that, and they're saying that their precedences acknowledge that and now make it so that using an emulator is unlawful, because now you're decrypting using the prod keys that you would have gotten from a hacked Switch. So they're sort of acknowledging that it's at least just as bad, and setting that up to be the reason why this too is unlawful, as they say. I think a lot of the color around Tears of the Kingdom specifically, 1 million copies were pirated, this much money was taken from Nintendo. I think that's just color, right? It's just putting some glitter on the lawsuit, but I think this is the crux of it. What do you think, Kerry?
So I got Tears of the Kingdom in ways, but I also bought it. So whatever, when they said that it was downloaded 1 million times, you got a -1 from that because I bought it. I also bought your special edition. So the pirated version that you're talking about does not equal a lost sale, because
how did they even get that number, right? They're just estimating that number.
It's a lot of those times they can just look at BitTorrent links and just say how many people are connected. All these unique IPs were in this torrent, so this is the number that we have.
Yeah,
it could be larger than that. There's also the statistics stuff where you can kind of evaluate. Statistics makes magic numbers. It's based on all of these parameters.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
All right. But there's lots of things here that, oh man, the precedent that it would set, it is precarious.
Yeah, the reason we're talking about this is because last week we opened up the show by saying, boy, oh boy, Emulation had a really good week, and that title and that title of the episode just did not do well because it was like, I think it was the day that I posted the episode, because we record these on Sundays and I tend to post them on Tuesday mornings. The day that we posted the episode, this news came out. So it, like, the idea, if they win this lawsuit, that could really change how things are done in the emulation space. You guys know what I mean?
Yeah. So one of the things that I also found interesting from the whole like coloring of the narrative is that they really made Yuzu out to be like the bad guys here, like that they are just targeting like these specific popular games and putting them out there early and stuff. But the Yuzu team, among the Switch emulators, you know, between Ryujinx and Yuzu's the one that's actually more principled, I would say, in the sense that they put a specific stance out there, like we're not supporting anything until after release. And so even when Tears of the Kingdom came out, people were having to modify their Yuzu installations in order to even get the game to work in the first place, because the Yuzu team would not touch it publicly until the actual day of release. Whereas Ryujinx was like, yeah, here's a new update, and you know, more or less it actually was for Tears of the Kingdom, you know. And so that's one of the things that's always been kind of odd to me about that. The other thing that I found really interesting is the kind of outcry from people in two specific ways. One is that they're saying this is all happening because you were emulating on a current console. If you just wait until the Switch is no longer available for purchase, like games and whatnot, then you can start pirating or doing your emulation. But even talking about it is what caused this to happen. So there's a lot of blowback from people saying that this is what you get, kind of thing. And the other thing that I saw a lot on Reddit in particular were people saying this is good because now we have to go back into the shadows. And so we like, it's bad for emulation as a whole, but it's great for us in that we have to go back to our little hidey hole because we got too uppity, basically.
Too close to the sun.
You're right.
Yeah.
So many good points there. On that one specifically, like, yeah, do you think that's where it'll go? Well, actually, before that, let me just say some of this, right? Like, it does feel like with the Steam Deck, with Yuzu going to Android, like emulation has just become a lot more accessible in the last year or two. And yeah, is that to blame to some degree?
I think so. You know, I think a lot of it has to do with just the kind of demographic that this is attracting. Because the honest truth is that piracy is happening on Yuzu and Ryujinx to play Switch games without buying them. It's happening, you know. And I think that the demographic of doing that are often skewing younger and like less able to buy their games. Like for me, I've got a huge cartridge collection. You know, it's just one of the things that I can enjoy as an adult, right? Yeah. But you see all these, like, I'm just going to put a number on it, but like a 14-year-old jumping in there, like, how do I play this game or whatever? And you can just tell kind of from their writing or whatever that it's somebody very young. My worry is that when things slow down or things get quiet or whatever, those folks who are generally less informed, they don't have the long history of emulation, they're the ones who are going to be asking the most about, hey, how do I get this thing happening? And so it's going to blow up more, where we're going to have this small age demographic just kind of jumping in and putting it out there on Reddit or whatever, just throwing a bunch of stuff out there, and it's going to make everyone look bad. You know what I mean? In the sense that Reddit's going to be filled with people asking for help, and that's going to be, you know, us old folks be like, stop asking. You know what I mean? But that's not going to satisfy them, right? And so, yeah.
So, Russ, where do I get my ROMs again?
One of life's great mysteries.
There's one thing I want to talk about, the point that you brought up, Russ. And truth be told, I made a Twitter video that was like, I'm a big Nintendo fan, blah, blah, blah. I hope Nintendo loses. That video I made after, because I was going to do like an 8-10 minute video where I was just like railing on Nintendo, and it got really, really ranty. And I was like, I'm not going to make this video. This is just super negative, and I don't want to hear the comments, so I'll just make something that's a lot more positive. Like, look at me, like, I support Nintendo like crazy, and I still want them to lose this. So I went in that direction because I would rather be in positive. However, in that video that I was going to make, that was a video, I actually recorded it and just deleted it. The point that I made in that video, like you had said, was people are saying that we shouldn't be emulating current gen consoles. I said, this is Nintendo's fault. This is Nintendo's doing. No one said, hey, Nintendo, use old tablet parts and then underclock it like crazy so that a Steam Deck could emulate it. No one told Nintendo to do that. Nintendo made its own choice to use low-powered hardware. That was something that Nintendo started doing after the GameCube. And then Well, that's Nintendo's fault. If Nintendo is getting sour grapes because everything can emulate a low-powered device, tough cookies. Make better hardware. Like you could just use current gen stuff and probably clock it a little bit higher. Like the next Switch 2, the Super Switch 2 is already going to be using old parts again. So is that our fault because it's going to be easier to emulate, or is that Nintendo's fault for using old stuff?
Well, I mean, let's look at like the PlayStation, the Xbox. If it were easy, if there were a way where you could use a computer to play those games, specifically PS5 or Xbox Series, whatever games. Xbox probably not a good example because they're all on PC anyway. But like PS5 games, like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which just came out, and I could play that on my PC. Like, would you say, well, I guess the PS5 should have been more powerful? Like, is that the argument that you're making?
You realize, like, do you know there's a PS4 emulator that exists, and it barely runs anything, and that's PS4, and PS4 is a bit more powerful than the Switch,
and it's using a translation layer, isn't it? So
it's using not even yeah. So think about that. Think about how emulation in itself. This is why when the Xbox One was able to emulate the Xbox 360, it was magic. It was dark voodoo that they were doing, because there's in no world should AMD Atom cores be able to emulate the 360 when that came out. That is just pure wizardry that they did, and they go into detail on like how they actually vet all that stuff and what they're doing, because they do next gen level emulation. But if you're talking about general emulation, typically what you're looking at is like an 8x difference. So you need 8 times more performance to emulate the previous machine effectively. And that's just if it's like straight. Like when you look like at Saturn, which has like a zillion coprocessors, and trying to emulate all of those and then sequence them into something, you need like an outrageously fast CPU to do all of that. So yeah, there's a reason why PS4 and PS5 emulation don't exist, is because no one's PC is powerful enough to emulate that.
I would also argue...
Sorry, Russ, just real quick. The idea that you're saying, it's because like the only reason this is happening is because the Switch is underpowered, and that justifies it. I don't necessarily agree with that. I will say I'm not saying I'm all for backing up your games.
Right. I'm not saying it justifies it.
Okay. That's what it seemed like to me, because you okay. I got what you're saying. Russ, what were you gonna say?
So I was kind of going to add to that, in that Nintendo has created an environment that supports emulation or encourages emulation. You mentioned PS4, or PlayStation, and Xbox. Say you wanted to play them on a computer, and it's like, well, hold on, you can already play most of those games on a computer, right? And I can pay for them legitimately, and enjoy them exactly how I want to. I have the choice.
That's a better argument to me.
Right, and Nintendo doesn't give you that choice. They're saying specifically unmodded Switch in our own terms and for as much as we can say. So, for example, if we want to play Super Mario 35 or whatever that game is, you can't anymore because they took it down from the Switch store. And so the only way to play that game is through emulation at this point. So they're creating their own beast, not in the sense that it justifies any sort of illegal means, if it is illegal, to play these games, but they are creating the environment that starts to support that. And so that's why I think people are so divided on it.
And I think what's worse about that specific point is that it's not just about the Switch, right? Like they made it very clear that they are also protecting their retro library, right? And when we talk about the PC, the fact that I bought a game and I bought it in 1997, I can still play that on my PC today. And that's just not held true for Nintendo. I hope that changes for Super Switch, Switch 2. But clearly I cannot play my old Nintendo games on my new Nintendo console, and they want to resell that to me. And they made it clear in that lawsuit, in the verbiage of that lawsuit, that they want to resell it to me.
And not only do they want to resell it to you, but they want you to subscribe to their service for it, where they then emulate it.
Correct.
They emulate ROMs of their games, which is ridiculous to me. I want to go ahead, Carrie.
I said, when you were reading off in the beginning of this, when you were reading off the whole list of like what's allowed, it was like that SpongeBob episode. He's like, turn your hips around town, step on your right foot, don't forget it. It's like this long list of ways that it's like legal to emulate is funny to me. Anyway, that was when you let it off. There's a point in that video where you can just see I start laughing just because it just starts washing over me. I'm just like, oh, legalese.
Oh
And the
yeah,
thing is,
legalese is the worst.
As us as old timers too, we remember the days of spending all that money on the Wii Virtual Console to play our Nintendo 64 or NES games and whatnot,
Absolutely.
right? And Nintendo's like, thanks for that time. You now have to rebuy that, or you have to
Yeah.
repay for
Absolutely.
it, right? And so they've already, they are pushing us into this spot where they're trying to take away our own ownership of these games, and it's terrible.
I want to get back to the idea of, people talking about, the idea that it's bad to emulate current consoles. Whether or not it has anything to do with power is completely beside the point, in my opinion. Nintendo is saying it's illegal to back up your games. And if they win this lawsuit, then it will be illegal to back up the games that are on the Nintendo Switch and, of course, on any other system moving forward, because it would be like precedent setting. And that means, look, we got to be able to back up these games now before we can't back up these games. Because if you look at the Wii U library and the 3DS library, they had a lot of games that were not physical games. Like, they were only available on the eShops. Those eShops are now gone, and there's piracy or emulation or whatever it is that you want to call it, although I don't think that those two things are, a do not equal sign in the middle there.
Right.
Whatever you want to call it, that's the only way to preserve these games.
Yeah. There's a part here where there is already legal precedent for clean room reverse engineering. There is already precedent for that. There's legal standing for that to be legal. This is also like during when IBM was trying to sue all the DOS compatible machines, and they were making other DOS compatible stuff using reverse engineered stuff, and the courts sided with the DOS compatibles, saying no, they're not looking at your stuff. They did their own work to make it work. And the funny thing was that DOS compatible machines were better than the IBM machines. But that's there's two parts there. So there's already legal precedent for the reverse engineering emulation to kind of ride on those coattails. The part where it gets hairy is the things that you said, is like the encapsulation of it, the encrypted part of it that is getting broken and stuff. That is that new frontier, because now it's no longer just the raw data that you're doing. You're circumventing the security part of it.
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. Yeah, allegedly. That is the part that gets really dicey, right? And that's where everyone is doing that now. It's like no one's not doing that. So it's like if that precedent wins, everything that if that was like the whole thing is like, oh, you can back it up, but is it encrypted? Like, where's the spoon? Like, you know what I mean? It's like that type of thing is like, if that was all that it takes, I hope that whatever court gets this just like, is like, no, this is not gonna, you can't just like wrap a thing around it and call it something different.
So really, what is the difference, though, between this encryption, we're talking about prod keys and all that kind of stuff, and just BIOS files, right? It seems to me that it's kind of the same concept, right? PS1 BIOS, PS2 BIOS, those are required to play those games, unless they have HLE BIOS, which is like high-level emulation ones. And so, that's the worrying thing for me, too, is that they set this precedent saying any decryption, circumvention kind of thing means that you can't do it, then we're out of luck when it comes to even something like Dolphin. Like that one has the IPL or the BIOS file like already kind of embedded in it. It decrypts it on its own, which is kind of how it got in hot water and got taken off Steam and all that other kind of stuff. It makes me worried that that's going to cause issues in other ways. Maybe Sony's like, hey, you know what? Let's come after like those PS2 guys for some reason. I don't even know.
Yeah,
because then they could resell the games on the PS5 under the PS Plus subscription thing.
Yeah.
Right.
I
That'd be
do
great
think
if they did.
I do think it's going to entirely focus on that, right? Like the defense and the prosecution, I guess it's not really prosecution in this case, but you know what I mean? The plaintiff and the defendant will both be focusing on whether or not they are circumventing technological measures. So like the defense is going to argue, the defendant is going to argue that they just aren't, right? Where we just reverse engineered. We did the same thing they did, just using our own, because they didn't copy any of the source code that Nintendo had. They just did their own decryption using the keys. So that's going to be the argument. One thing to note here too, right? Like, because a lot of people have been saying that this is just Nintendo I forget what the word is, but just trying to make Yuzu and the people behind it run out of money, right? Go bankrupt, possibly. But I do feel like they think they can win this, right? One good piece of news that wasn't in the show notes, so I don't know if we're all aware, but they do have a lawyer apparently, so it looks like they're going to fight that. So we're obviously all going to keep a keen eye on where this goes. Clearly,
we don't know if they're going to fight it. They got a lawyer. I mean, somebody's coming after you with a lawsuit. You get a lawyer so that the lawyer can advise you what to do, right?
Fair.
But we don't know if they're going to be like, bring it, Nintendo, or if they're going to be like, let's settle out of court, because one of two things is going to happen. Well, one of like four things is going to happen. They go to court, Nintendo wins, nightmare scenario. They go to court, nightmare, Nintendo loses, there's rejoicing in the streets. They don't go to court and they settle. I guess it's one of three choices. They don't go to court and they don't settle. I think that's a happy middle ground to where, like, Yuzu just said, I mean, sorry for the people that work at Yuzu, but if they just say, all right, we're not going to fight this, we're going to settle out of court and be done with this, as long as it doesn't go to court and doesn't set precedent, then that is a win for emulation. But if it goes to court and Nintendo wins, very bad, which is terrible. Why I feel like Nintendo wouldn't bring the case if they didn't think that they could win, because they would be very unhappy if it went the other way.
Yeah, there's a part here that I wanted to, like, if we talk about Christmas, there was a thing that you were talking about, Rich, that I wanted to piggyback on. What were you talking about just a second ago?
So before I mentioned they had a lawyer, we were talking about.
Right. So I was going to mention, this is a little funny gag thing. This is the crazy Carrie, conspiracy theory Carrie is again, this is like the victim blaming type of mentality. Is Nintendo makes weak hardware, and the Super Switch 2 is going to be weak hardware again. So they're going to have another situation where emulation is going to rapidly catch up to emulate Super Switch 2. So this is also conspiracy theory Carrie saying this is Nintendo getting ahead of it and trying to stamp down any type of emulation for Super Switch is the conspiracy theory part of that go in there.
And you're not alone, right? I saw a bunch of that. Go ahead, Russ.
I was just going to say, the whole paradigm is going to shift here very soon, because we have flash carts for the Switch, and that's going to change a lot of the tempo, because once there's two components here. There's the cart that we've already seen in a couple of videos, like Damn It Jeff just made one, where you basically put it, a backup of your game file, you put it on an SD card, put in this cartridge thing, put it in, and you can then play it. But the other half of that, and it hasn't had any videos about it because I think they're still working on it, is a cartridge dumper. So this will be a little USB dongle. You put your game in, and it's going to dump all your files onto it. Then you take those files, put them on an SD card, put them in that cartridge, then put them in your Switch. You've not modified your Switch in any way at that point, but you have backed up and are playing a backup of your game. So the whole circumventing of all that stuff, I think there still is there's no prod keys even required for that, as long as you're just playing it on the original hardware. So there's no decryption or anything else happening other than whatever is happening in those cartridges. And so that's a whole another paradigm shift. Yuzu isn't even required for any of that stuff. So what's going to happen then? There's
a part of me that wishes the MIG Switch waited until the Super Switch came out, and then when the Super Switch came out, they're like, because if all of us that have physical Switch games, the hope is that we could just use our Switch cartridges that we already bought and put it into the Super Switch, right?
Right.
And if Nintendo didn't know that there was any flash cart that was made, the Super Switch would come out with the same Switch cartridge, and then the MIG Switch would come out, and then Nintendo would be like, oh no, instant flash cart for Super Switch 2. So I have to wonder what Nintendo's doing, because now they know it's in their playbook, and the Super Switch got delayed. There's a delay that happened. Wink, wink. Wonder what they're doing with the Switch cartridge slot.
Part of me thinks that they're just going to yank that slot right out of there, go all digital, and say, if you have games that you bought digitally, they're compatible with the Super Switch. If you have physical games, they're not. And I think this, plus the idea that big stores are no longer carrying physical media, I think those things add up to it being likely that it could be the end of physical media. And For me, I don't care because I never use physical media if I can help it because it's just not very convenient. That being said, I want physical media to exist for everybody else that it is important to.
Right.
Agreed.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, another piece of emulation news that came out this week, like on the same day. I think part of me thinks it was spurred on by this lawsuit, almost like the lawsuit had a chilling effect. Is the fact that Russ went out and made a video all about the Emulation Station Desktop Edition coming to the Amazon Android app. It became, thanks to his video, the #1 app on that store. And then Amazon said, here, let me make sure I get this right. Amazon has decided to remove Emulation Station Desktop Edition from their app store because the app facilitates. I'm sorry, that's not even close to a word. The app facilitates emulating and pirating of games from third-party sources without explicit authorization from those sources, which is all kinds of ridiculous. By that logic, by that argument, my Windows machine, like, they should ban Windows because my Windows machine can launch an emulator. Like, there's nothing illegal in Emulation Station. There is nothing there that it doesn't facilitate emulation. It launches programs for you, that's a ridiculous thing. Russ, you obviously had to put out a new video after that one. Talk about your thoughts on this process.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. It's an app launcher that just specifically launches emulation apps, and so that's really the reality of it there. It's like saying you can't use VLC media player, like a video player, because you could watch an illegal movie on the VLC media player. You know what I mean? Like, it just doesn't make any sense. And so I get it. And I do agree that I think that probably some of this came from the attention that was coming from the Nintendo Yuzu thing. I don't know. Like, I felt like that, plus the fact that it was #1 in the App Store, got people to look at it and go, what is this thing? And then without even understanding what it is, some boardroom happened or whatever. And, I used to see it all the time in government work where people who do not understand what's going on are the ones that are making the decision, right? And so that's kind of what I feel like is probably happening here. Is like someone's like, well, you just said the word emulation. It's got the word emulation in it. That's a bad thing. And so take it down. And so they did, and it's all good. It pushed the publisher or the developer to put it on Patreon instead. And so that's not a perfect solution either, because that means that every time they have an update, you'll have to go and re-download it from Patreon and then install it, like kind of sideload it yourself. But it does open up the fact that you don't have to use the Amazon App Store to get the app anymore, which is a little bit convenient in that sense. So yeah, it is what it is. And it's just so ironic. I mean, the fact that you can just get like the PlayStation Portable emulator on the Amazon App Store. You can buy the drastic DS emulator on the App Store, but you can't use Emulation Station. The thing that actually just launches it is just, it's just kind of crazy.
Well, what do you think about that, Rich?
Yeah, I think it's insane. It's literally a launcher, right? So are there other launchers, like not emulation related launchers, but are there other sorts of launchers on Android? Because there's plenty on Windows, right?
Yeah, so ATV Pro is a good one where it makes you can choose which apps that are going to show. It makes it very Android TV friendly. You have these big tabs you can tap on.
Yeah. So it's just like that, and it just feels like you said, they didn't know what they were doing when they did it. They just saw a red flag, and I think the fact that it went #1 probably even more so than the fact that Nintendo issued their lawsuit that day. I think the fact that it made #1 was just, it was scary to enough folks. And here's the thing too, I saw a tweet after the Nintendo thing that Valve and Meta should really help Yuzu and fund Yuzu, and the thing is, I don't think they're very interested in that, right? Meta specifically, they'd have no interest, as far as I could tell, in protecting.
That's a weird thing. Yeah,
right.
Warren Buffett should.
right, exactly.
It's a really random thing to say.
Valve has this reputation for being a good guy in the industry, especially by a lot of people who watch this show.
For sure.
You always hear about good guy Valve, and they make a lot of decisions that a lot of people, a lot of consumers are happy with, because I think, in my opinion, Valve looks at the long term and says, okay, sure, we could make a quick buck by doing A, but if we
Yep.
don't do that, we'll probably end up making more money in the long term. And
Yep.
I'm not saying that they're bad,
No.
but they're not, like, companies aren't your friends. They just
Yeah.
Right.
people get this weird mentality when it comes to any company, Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo, Valve, and they start to think of them as like, oh, these are my buddies. And so then they defend them anytime anything like that happens. So for the people that are like, Valve should bankroll the Yuzu lawsuit, or, you know, whoever else
Right.
bankrolls the Yuzu, like, what would be in it for them? There's
Right.
nothing that they would get out of it. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then Nintendo is, filing that lawsuit. I know, going back to Nintendo, right? But they were filing that lawsuit on behalf of Nintendo, but also the third parties that sell games on their store, like Valve, right? So, and Valve has shown that with Dolphin coming to Steam, that they want to be friends with Nintendo and not make an enemy of them.
Yeah.
You know, this is one of my worries about the whole thing, is that Nintendo, from a gamer's perspective, I think most people are in the know that Nintendo can be a-holes, right? Like they do things in their own interest, and
you never go full Nintendo.
yeah, exactly. You get screwed often by Nintendo. But
I'm sorry,
to the
I
aver-
couldn't hear what you were saying, Russ. Could you back up like 30 seconds?
Yeah. So I'm just the idea that Nintendo among gamers has kind of a bad reputation, and just being consumer unfriendly. However, if you just take grandma, she thinks, oh, the guys that make Mario, they make these cute, fun, like family friendly, like they're a wholesome company. They make these quirky little things that I remember from the 80s and whatever. I worry that, like, the judge on the bench of this lawsuit is going to be a grandma and not a gamer, right? And so they're going to be like, how dare Yuzu come after Nintendo, this wholesome company who's just trying to get it so that people can play games, right?
Yeah.
So I'm worried about that aspect, and that they have cultivated this image for themselves that makes them so nice and wholesome looking among the non-gamers, that's who's going to be setting this legal precedence. And so we're going to get to this point where gamers are going to get screwed just because we're the ones in the know.
Yeah, that's totally a thing.
As the only grandparent on this podcast, I just want to let everybody know that I'm offended for all of you. Okay, so there you go.
Well, dude.
Carrie, I cut you off. What were you saying, man?
No, it's Russ is right. There's a part of that I like. It's often my periphery. Like I recognize that it's there, but I never fully appreciate it. And it's always been the thing, especially when I was growing up, because I would be always so hyper focused on gaming, and all the other things in there is like super plugged in. Like, 2005 and 2006, when I was looking at the stock market, I was like, I'm going to invest in Nvidia. I'm going to invest in AMD. And AMD was like $2 a share. Nvidia was $5 a share. I'm like, why are these companies like valueless? Like, why does no one like... Nvidia is like the king of the crop. They make the best GPUs. They just year after year. Like, how is this company only $5? And it's like that same thing that I'm just like reminded of. Like, we're starting to see more of that shift, because as we've grown up, other people that also grew up and know that Nvidia is bigger, you see all this other stuff is just like taking off, more so to AI. But there's AMD is taking off, and AMD took off before AI happened, right? So that was what, like $70 a share, $100 a share. So there's like that part of catching up, but it's also like what Bob Iger said from Disney. He's like, they just invested $1.5 billion in Epic, and they had an interview with him. Like, he's like, I recognize that my nieces and nephews, they're on iPads and they're just playing games all the time. And it's like, you just noticed that now, dude? Like, where you been? Like, so there's that worry that I get blindsided, because I do have, shades on, because I'm just hyper plugged in. So things that are happening immediately, I get the news of, and I am instantly aware of it. And I'll talk to people about it that I think should be like adjacent to where I am, and they'll be completely oblivious to it. So there's like that part of not being fully cognizant of what's going on. And as Russ says, that is a worry that I don't really think about all that often, but I recognize I should.
Yeah,
so
the people who make the decisions, just like Russ said, the people who make the decisions are often the uninformed, and they're going to have a lawyer bring in an expert witness to explain what encryption is, and then you're depending on the people who are having explained this to, not like You know, when Carrie starts throwing up a bar graph and my eyes glaze over, as somebody posted on Twitter. You know, that you got to hope that that doesn't happen in the jury pool. If this is a jury thing or a judge thing, you got to hope that that doesn't happen, because if it does, the people just aren't going to understand. Like, it's hard to explain this stuff to a layman.
I think what you have to, I think like one good thing would be like, if you like, this is a Hershey bar in its wrapper. This is what the wrapper is, what Nintendo is saying is that they shouldn't be doing. But when it gets to Yuzu, it's already unwrapped. Whoever unwrapped it, that wasn't Yuzu. It just happened to be unwrapped by the time it got there. So what you're talking about is not on Yuzu.
Isn't it unwrapped by the prod keys? Like, just my understanding, because I don't do the emulation for modern stuff. I just play it on my Switch. If I'm going to play a Switch game, I just play it on my Switch because that's the easiest way.
Right. But like,
the prod keys are the thing. Like, if I have a ROM, Yuzu is using the prod keys to decrypt that ROM. That's what Nintendo's saying. Am I right about that?
A defoiler. Yeah, but like, where did you get the machine to like? That just appeared. Yuzu didn't generate that for you.
Right.
I guess they can point to like the place that like you can go over there to get the defoiler, and it's just like remove the link, guys. Just remove the link. But yeah, it's along those lines. And if like the part that unwraps stuff is the crux of the situation, which we've already talked about again, that is like such a silly thing to like. Yes, Nintendo wins. Case closed. Straight to jail.
Straight to jail. Right. Oh my goodness.
But I do worry about this whole thing though, like who's going to be in the room when they're deliberating, because that's going to matter. Like just to give you a little bit of background, so I used to be in the Navy, and I was Master Chief in the Navy, and I was a linguist. So there's very few linguists in the Navy. There was 2,000 of us altogether. That's very small when it comes to like full force terms. And so I was the rating lead for a while, like the head guy for the 2,000 people. And so I worked for a 3-star admiral, and that 3-star admiral was a METOC officer. METOC means like weather guessers is what we call them. So people who do like meteorology and stuff like that. No idea about anything linguist, but we're all within the same kind of framework. And so I had to, about a year into my job there, I said, listen, Admiral, you cannot talk about this stuff without me in the room. Like, you're just not allowed to. I'm like, you stop having these meetings, deciding the fate of these 2,000 people without understanding the complexities of all this stuff. Not only is it 2,000 people, but there are dozens of languages within that, and all these different communities and all these like missions and all this stuff, right? So how are we going to expect that a judge on a panel is listening to this expert testimony that they're going to understand everything that's going on, and then also make a judgment on it, which takes years and years and years of experience. And so I'm just very worried about this. If it does go to trial, or whatever they call it, like to go to the full lawsuit, goes to court, how is it going to actually play out? I don't know.